It was late at night when Maya Johnson drove through the quiet streets of the city. She had just left a meeting with a group of civil rights activists who were working hard to bring attention to unfair treatment by law enforcement. Maya believed strongly in standing up for what was right, even if it meant facing challenges along the way. Her heart was full of hope, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right about the road ahead. The streets were mostly empty, except for a few cars passing by now and then. Streetlights flickered overhead, creating patches of light and shadow across the asphalt. Maya glanced at the clock on her dashboard. It was nearly midnight. She sighed softly, thinking about how much work still needed to be done to make things better for everyone. But tonight, all she wanted was to get home safely. As she turned onto a quieter street, Maya noticed two sets of headlights appearing in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought nothing of it, just another pair of drivers heading home like her. But soon, those headlights grew brighter and closer. Before she knew it, two police cars surrounded her vehicle, blocking her path forward and cutting off any chance of escape. Maya's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel as adrenaline began to course through her veins. What had she done? She hadn't broken any rules or laws. She was simply driving home after a long evening. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help anything. Slowly, she rolled down her window and waited for the officers to approach. Two men stepped out of their vehicles, one tall and broad-shouldered, the other shorter but no less intimidating. They both wore uniforms with badges gleaming under the harsh glare of their flashlights. The taller one introduced himself as Officer Jack Riley, while the shorter man said his name was Officer Kyle Dawson. Neither smiled or offered a friendly greeting. Instead, they shone their flashlights directly into Maya's eyes, making it hard for her to see them clearly. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" Officer Riley asked sharply, his tone accusatory rather than curious. Maya blinked against the brightness and shook her head. "No, I don't," she replied evenly. "I wasn't speeding and I followed all traffic signals." Officer Dawson leaned closer, peering into her car as though searching for some hidden clue. "We got reports of someone running a red light around here," he said, "and your car matches the description." Maya frowned, trying to process what they were saying. "That can't be me," she insisted. "I've been careful the whole time I've been driving tonight. You must have the wrong person." But instead of listening to her explanation, the officers exchanged quick glances before stepping back. Something about their body language made Maya uneasy. It wasn't the usual behavior of cops conducting a routine traffic stop. There was a coldness in their expressions, a sense that this wasn't really about a supposed traffic violation. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Officer Riley ordered, his voice firm and unyielding. Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure whether complying would make things worse, but she knew refusing could escalate the situation unnecessarily. With a deep breath, she opened her door and stepped out onto the pavement. The cool night air hit her skin, sending a shiver down her spine. She kept her hands visible, clutching her purse tightly as she faced the officers. "What's going on?" she asked again, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Why are you doing this?" Neither officer answered her question. Instead, they started circling her car, inspecting it closely. Maya watched them warily, her mind racing. Was this really happening? Why would they target her like this? She hadn't done anything wrong. Then, without warning, Officer Dawson opened the driver's side door and leaned inside. Maya took a step forward, alarmed. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You can't search my car without probable cause." Dawson ignored her protest, rummaging through the front seat. Meanwhile, Riley stood nearby, arms crossed, watching Maya's every move. She felt trapped, unable to do anything but stand there and watch as they violated her privacy. Moments later, Dawson straightened up, holding a small plastic bag filled with white powder. Maya's eyes widened in shock. "That's not mine," she exclaimed, panic creeping into her voice. "You planted that." Riley smirked, shaking his head as though amused by her reaction. "Save it for the station," he said dismissively. "You're coming with us." Maya's mind raced. This couldn't be real. These men were framing her. For what? To silence her, to intimidate her? Whatever their reasons, she knew she couldn't let them win. As they cuffed her hands behind her back and led her toward one of the patrol cars, she vowed silently that she wouldn't give up without a fight. Little did the officers know their actions that night would set off a chain of events far beyond their control. Maya Johnson wasn't just any ordinary citizen. In fact, she held one of the highest-ranking positions in the country, a fact that would soon leave her accusers stunned and scrambling to save themselves from the consequences of their reckless decision. For now, however, Maya sat quietly in the back seat of the patrol car, staring out the window at the dark city streets rolling past. Her thoughts churned with anger, fear, and determination. She didn't know exactly how she would prove her innocence yet, but one thing was certain. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The ride to the police station felt endless. Maya sat in silence, replaying the events of the night over and over in her mind. She couldn't believe what had just happened. How could they accuse her of something she didn't do? And why would they plant drugs in her car? It made no sense. But one thing was clear. They were trying to frame her, and she needed to figure out why. When they arrived at the station, Maya was led through a maze of hallways into a small, cold room. The walls were bare except for a clock ticking loudly above the door. A metal table stood in the center, surrounded by chairs that looked uncomfortable and worn. Officer Riley gestured for her to sit down, while Officer Dawson leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her like a hawk. Maya took a deep breath as she lowered herself onto the hard chair. She kept her posture straight and her face calm, refusing to let them see how scared she really was. Fear wouldn't help her now. What she needed was focus and a plan. For several minutes, neither officer said a word. They just stared at her, waiting for her to crack. But Maya wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Finally, Riley broke the silence. "You know why you're here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "We found illegal substances in your car. That's possession with intent to distribute." Maya shook her head slowly. "I already told you I don't know anything about those drugs. Someone planted them there." Dawson snorted, rolling his eyes. "Yeah, sure. Convenient excuse." "It's not an excuse," Maya shot back, her voice steady. "It's the truth. You can check my record if you want. I've never been involved in anything like this." Riley leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. His eyes narrowed as he studied her face. "Listen, lady, if you cooperate, things will go easier for you. Just admit what you did and maybe we can work something out." Maya clenched her fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout. Admitting to something she hadn't done wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. "I'm not admitting to something I didn't do," she replied firmly, "and I won't answer any more questions until I speak to my lawyer." The officers exchanged glances, clearly annoyed by her refusal to play along. Riley stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the tiny room. "Fine," he snapped. "Have it your way, but don't say we didn't warn you." With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving Dawson behind to keep an eye on Maya. She watched him leave, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. At least Riley was gone, for now. But she knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As the minutes ticked by, Maya tried to stay calm. She reminded herself that she wasn't powerless. She had resources, connections, and most importantly, the truth on her side. All she needed was a chance to prove it. Her thoughts were interrupted when the door opened again. This time it wasn't Riley or Dawson. It was Sergeant Paul Miller. He was older than the other officers, with gray hair and a stern expression that seemed carved into his face. He carried himself with authority, walking into the room like he owned the place. "Ms. Johnson," he began, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. His tone was polite, almost friendly, but there was an edge to it that set Maya on edge. "Let me start by saying I understand how stressful this must be for you. But trust me, things don't have to get worse. If you cooperate, we can make this whole mess disappear." Maya raised an eyebrow, skeptical of his sudden kindness. "Disappear?" she echoed. You mean drop the charges? Miller smiled thinly, nodding. Exactly. All you need to do is sign a confession. Say you made a mistake and we'll cut you a deal. No jail time, no criminal record, just a slap on the wrist. Maya stared at him, incredulous. Did he really think she'd fall for that? I'm not signing anything, she said flatly. Because I didn't commit a crime. Miller's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. Look, Ms. Johnson, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We've got evidence against you. Unless you want to spend the next few years locked up, I suggest you take the offer. I already told you, Maya said, her voice rising slightly. That evidence is fake. You planted those drugs in my car, and if you try to push this further, people will find out the truth. Miller leaned back in his chair, studying her, carefully. For a moment, he looked almost amused. People? He repeated. What people? Who's going to believe you over us? Maya didn't respond right away. Instead, she met his gaze directly, letting him see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't just some random person off the street. She had influence, power, and allies who wouldn't hesitate to step in when they heard about this. But revealing her true identity too soon could backfire. She needed to wait for the right moment. Before Miller could press her further, Dawson's radio crackled to life. He listened intently for a few seconds before stepping out of the room. Moments later, Riley returned looking flustered. He whispered something to Miller, who frowned deeply before standing up. We'll continue this later, Miller said curtly, heading toward the door. As he left, Riley gave Maya one last glare before following him out. Alone in the room once again, Maya allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Whatever was happening outside, it seemed to be working in her favor. Now all she had to do was wait. Meanwhile, miles away, Lisa Carter was frantically making calls from her apartment. When she'd received Maya's message earlier, she'd immediately known something was wrong. Maya rarely reached out unless it was urgent, and hearing her friend's voice trembling with anger and fear had sent Lisa into action mode. After contacting a trusted colleague at the Department of Justice, Lisa explained the situation to Agent Chris Bennett. Maya's been arrested, she said quickly. They're accusing her of drug possession, but it's bogus. She thinks they planted evidence in her car. Chris listened carefully, his brow furrowing. Do you think she's safe, he asked. For now, Lisa replied, but we need to act fast. If word gets out about who she really is, it could blow up in everyone's faces. Chris nodded, already formulating a plan. Leave it to me. I'll gather a team and head to the station. We'll handle this discreetly for now, but we might need to escalate if things get worse. Back at the station, Maya sat patiently, biding her time. She knew help was coming. She just had to hold on until then. As the hours dragged on, she replayed every detail of the night in her mind, searching for clues about why she'd been targeted. Had it been because of her activism? Or was there something else going on? Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside her door. Riley and Dawson reappeared, followed by a group of men in suits. One of them stepped forward, introducing himself as Agent Chris Bennett. His presence alone commanded respect, and Maya felt a flicker of hope ignite within her. Ms. Johnson, Chris said calmly, offering her a reassuring smile. We're here to ensure your rights are protected. Please don't say anything until we've had a chance to review the situation. Maya nodded gratefully, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to relax. Help had arrived and justice was about to be served. The moment Agent Chris Bennett entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. Maya could feel it immediately. The tension thickened, but this time, it wasn't directed at her. It was as though the officers realized they were no longer in control of the situation. Chris carried himself with authority, his calm demeanor masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. He nodded briefly at Maya before turning his attention to Sergeant Paul Miller and the others. Sergeant Miller, Chris began, his voice firm but polite. I'm Agent Chris Bennett from the Department of Justice. I'd like to have a word about Ms. Johnson's arrest. Miller frowned, clearly taken aback by the sudden appearance of federal agents. What's the Department of Justice got to do with this? He asked, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the unease in his tone. Chris didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed a folder on the table and opened it, revealing official documents inside. Before we proceed, let me clarify something, he said, pulling out a single sheet of paper. This is Ms. Maya Johnson's identification card. Would you care to explain why she's being held here? Miller glanced at the document, then back at Maya, who stood quietly beside Chris. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face, then realization dawned, and his eyes widened in horror. The name on the ID might not have meant much to him initially, but the title beneath it certainly did. Director of Homeland Security. You've got to be kidding me, Riley muttered, under his breath, taking a step back as though distancing himself from the situation would somehow make it less real. Chris ignored the comment and continued. Ms. Johnson holds one of the highest-ranking positions in the country. Framing her for possession of illegal substances is not only reckless, it's a direct violation of federal law. Now, I suggest you release her immediately and prepare to answer some very serious questions. The room fell silent. Even Dawson, who had been glaring at Maya moments earlier, now looked pale and shaken. None of them had expected this twist. To them, Maya had simply been another person they could intimidate into submission. They never imagined they'd picked a fight with someone so powerful. Maya stepped forward, her expression calm but resolute. She looked each officer in the eye, letting them see the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. You thought I was powerless, she said, her voice steady and clear. You thought you could silence me because of my race or my activism. But what you did tonight proves exactly why people like me speak out against injustice. You abused your power, and now everyone will know about it. Her words hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the sound of shifting feet and nervous coughs. Miller tried to recover his composure, stammering an apology. Ms. Johnson, this is clearly a misunderstanding. If we'd known... If you'd... Known? Maya interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Would that have stopped you? Or would you have gone through with it anyway, just like you've probably done to countless others? Chris placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling her to stop. He turned to Miller and the others, his expression hardening. We'll need full access to your records, including surveillance footage, witness statements, and any evidence collected during the arrest. Additionally, all officers involved in this incident are suspended pending further investigation. Riley and Dawson exchanged panicked glances. Suspended? That was only the beginning of their troubles. As Chris spoke, more federal agents entered the room, surrounding the officers and ensuring there would be no resistance. The message was clear. This was no longer a local matter. It had escalated to a national level, and the consequences would be severe. Once the initial shock wore off, Maya was finally allowed to leave the interrogation room. Lisa Carter waited outside, relief washing over her face when she saw her friend emerge unharmed. Are you okay? Lisa asked, hugging Maya tightly. I'm fine, Maya replied, managing a small smile despite everything. But this isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Chris joined them shortly after, briefing Maya on the next steps. We'll handle the legal side of things, he assured her. Your safety and reputation are our top priorities. However, we also need to decide how public we want to make this. Exposing their actions could spark widespread outrage and potentially lead to meaningful reforms. Maya nodded thoughtfully. She knew the risks of going public. It would put her in the spotlight, making her a target for criticism and backlash. But it would also shine a light on systemic issues that had plagued law enforcement for decades. Let's do it, she said firmly. If this can help prevent others from experiencing what I went through tonight, then it's worth it. Chris smiled approvingly. I thought you'd say that. We'll start drafting a statement and coordinating with the media. By morning, the whole country will know what happened here. As the night wore on, Maya found herself reflecting on the events that had unfolded. She couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, anger at the injustice she'd faced, gratitude for the support she'd received, and determination to turn this nightmare into something positive. Sitting in a quiet corner of the station, she pulled out her phone and typed a quick message to Lisa. They underestimated me, she wrote. But they won't make that mistake again. Lisa replied almost instantly. No, they won't. And neither will anyone else. By sunrise, the story had broken nationwide. News outlets reported on the attempted framing of Maya Johnson, highlighting her role as Homeland Security Director and calling for accountability. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters, demanding justice not only for Maya, but for all victims of police misconduct. Social media exploded with hashtags like Justice for Maya and End Police Abuse, amplifying the call for reform. Inside the station, the officers involved scrambled to defend themselves, but their efforts were futile. Internal Affairs launched an investigation, uncovering a pattern of misconduct that extended far beyond this single incident. Riley, Dawson, and Miller were placed on administrative leave, their careers hanging by a thread. Maya watched the fallout unfold from the comfort of her home, surrounded by friends and colleagues who supported her every step of the way. Though exhausted, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a better future for everyone, and she was ready to fight for it. For now, the battle had been won, but Maya knew the war was far from over. The days following Maya Johnson's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. News of the attempted frame-up spread like wildfire across the nation, sparking outrage and calls for justice. Protesters filled the streets in cities nationwide, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and "End Police Corruption." Social media buzzed with discussions about systemic racism, police accountability, and the need for reform. For many, Maya's story became a symbol of resilience and courage, a reminder that even those in positions of power weren't immune to injustice. Maya herself was deeply moved by the overwhelming support she received. Messages poured in from strangers who shared their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. Activists praised her bravery, while politicians called for immediate action to address the issues exposed by the scandal. But Maya knew that public sympathy alone wouldn't bring about lasting change. Action was needed, and she was determined to lead the charge. Early one morning, Maya met with Lisa Carter and Agent Chris Bennett in a quiet conference room at Homeland Security headquarters. The three of them had spent hours strategizing about how best to use this moment to push for meaningful reforms. Maya wanted more than just punishment for the officers involved. She wanted to create safeguards that would prevent similar incidents from happening again. "We need to focus on transparency," Maya said, pacing back and forth as she spoke. "Body cameras for all officers, stricter disciplinary measures for misconduct, and independent oversight boards. These are things people have been asking for years, but nothing has changed because no one in power has listened." Lisa nodded, jotting down notes. "And we should also highlight community-based solutions," she added. "Training programs that teach de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity could make a big difference." Chris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "It won't be easy," he warned. "There will be resistance, from unions, from politicians, maybe even from within your own department. Are you ready for that?" Maya stopped pacing and looked at him squarely. "I didn't ask for this fight," she said firmly. "But now that I'm in it, I'm not backing down. If they want to challenge me, let them try. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone who's ever been treated unfairly because of their race or background." With a plan in place, Maya prepared for what would be one of the most important moments of her career, a national press conference. Held in a large auditorium packed with reporters, activists, and government officials, the event drew intense media attention. As Maya stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. All eyes were on her. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice strong and steady. "What happened to me last week was wrong. Not just because it targeted me personally, but because it reflects a much larger problem in our society. Too often, people in positions of authority abuse their power, targeting those they see as vulnerable or powerless. And too often, there are no consequences for their actions." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But tonight I stand before you not as a victim, but as someone committed to creating change. because if my experience can shine a light on these injustices, then it will have been worth it. Maya went on to outline the reforms she planned to implement, emphasizing the importance of accountability and transparency. She announced partnerships with advocacy groups to develop training programs for law enforcement officers, as well as initiatives to improve relations between police, departments, and the communities they served. She also called for federal legislation mandating body cameras for all officers and establishing independent review boards to investigate allegations of misconduct. As she spoke, the audience listened intently, hanging on every word. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Reporters rushed to ask questions, eager to hear more about her plans. Maya answered each question thoughtfully, never losing sight of her message. Justice wasn't optional. It was essential. Behind the scenes, however, the fallout continued. Internal affairs investigators uncovered disturbing evidence of corruption within the police department where Maya had been arrested. Dozens of cases involving planted evidence, coerced confessions, and excessive force came to light, implicating not only Riley, Dawson, and Miller, but also several other officers. Criminal charges were filed against those involved, sending shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. In response, protests grew louder, demanding sweeping changes to policing practices. Some departments resisted, arguing that reforms would hinder their ability to do their jobs effectively. Others embraced the movement, pledging to work with community leaders to rebuild trust. The debate raged on, dividing opinion but ultimately keeping the issue front and center in the public consciousness. Meanwhile, Maya faced challenges of her own. Critics accused her of using her position for personal gain, claiming she was exaggerating the incident to further her political agenda. Others questioned whether her proposed reforms would actually work, pointing to past efforts that had failed to produce significant results. Despite the backlash, Maya remained steadfast, knowing that progress rarely came without opposition. One evening, after another long day of meetings and interviews, Maya sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled below, reminding her of the millions of lives affected by the decisions made in rooms like this one. She thought about the protesters marching in the streets, the families torn apart by injustice, and the countless individuals still waiting for their voices to be heard. "It's not enough," she whispered to herself, though no one else was there to hear it. Not yet. Lisa found her moments later, leaning against the doorway with a soft smile. "You've already done so much," she said gently. "Don't forget to give yourself credit." Maya turned to face her friend, managing a small smile. "I'll celebrate when we've fixed everything that's broken," she replied. "Until then, there's still work to do." Lisa nodded, understanding completely. "Well, tomorrow's another day, and you've got plenty of people ready to stand beside you." Maya took a deep breath, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Together, she and her allies would keep pushing forward, one step at a time until justice prevailed. For now, the world watched and waited, hopeful that this moment would mark the beginning of real change. And Maya Johnson stood ready to lead the way. Months passed since the night Maya Johnson was wrongfully arrested, but the impact of that event continued to ripple across the nation. The scandal had sparked a wave of change, forcing communities, lawmakers, and law enforcement agencies to confront long-standing issues head-on. While progress was slow and often met with resistance, Maya remained unwavering in her commitment to justice. Every day, she worked tirelessly to ensure that what happened to her would never happen to anyone else. Inside Homeland Security headquarters, Maya's presence inspired both admiration and respect. Her colleagues admired not just her leadership, but also her resilience. Despite facing criticism and pushback from powerful opponents, she refused to back down. Instead, she used every opportunity to advocate for reform, speaking passionately about the need for accountability, transparency, and fairness in policing. One morning, Maya arrived early at the office, eager to dive into another busy day. As she walked through the halls, Sunlight poured through the tall windows, illuminating the polished floors and brightening the space. Colleagues greeted her warmly, some stopping briefly to thank her for her efforts or share stories of how her work had impacted their lives. Each interaction reminded her why this fight mattered so deeply. In her office, Maya sat down at her desk and opened a file filled with updates on the initiatives she had launched. Progress reports showed promising signs. Several police departments had adopted mandatory body camera policies, while others were experimenting with community oversight boards. Training programs aimed at teaching officers de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity were gaining traction, thanks in part to partnerships with advocacy groups. But it wasn't all good news. Resistance to reform remained strong in certain areas. Some police unions argued that new regulations made their jobs harder, while critics accused Maya of undermining law enforcement altogether. These challenges weighed heavily on her, but they only strengthened her resolve. Change is never easy, she often reminded herself, but it's always worth fighting for. Later that afternoon, Maya met with Lisa Carter and Agent Chris Bennett in a small conference room. They reviewed recent developments, discussing strategies to address lingering obstacles. One major issue was funding. Many departments claimed they lacked the resources to implement reforms effectively. To tackle this problem, Maya proposed redirecting unused federal grants toward underfunded agencies, ensuring they had the tools needed to make meaningful changes. "We're making progress," Chris said, flipping through a stack of documents. "But there's still a lot of ground to cover. Some states are dragging their feet, and we can't let them fall behind." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "We'll keep pushing," she replied. "If necessary, I'll visit those places myself and meet with local leaders. Sometimes people just need to hear directly from someone who understands what's at stake." Lisa smiled, impressed by Maya's determination. "You've already done more than most people could dream of," she said. "Don't forget to take care of yourself too. You're human. You need rest." Maya chuckled softly, appreciating the reminder. "I know," she admitted, "but when I think about everyone out there counting on me, it's hard to slow down." That evening, after leaving the office, Maya took a quiet walk through the city. The streets were alive with activity, families strolling together, vendors selling snacks, musicians playing cheerful tunes. For a moment, she allowed herself to step away from the weight of her responsibilities and simply enjoy being present. Yet even here, reminders of her mission surrounded her. A group of teenagers held up signs advocating for justice, while an elderly man handed out flyers promoting a community meeting about police reform. As she paused to watch them, Maya felt a surge of hope. Yes, the road ahead was long and difficult, but she wasn't alone. Countless individuals, ordinary citizens, activists, and allies within government institutions were working alongside her to create a better future. Together, they formed a movement far greater than any one person. When she returned home, Maya spent some time reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the night she was arrested, the fear and anger she had felt, and the overwhelming support she'd received afterward. Most of all, she thought about the lessons she'd learned along the way. Power wasn't something to wield selfishly. It was a tool meant to uplift others and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The next morning, Maya stood in front of her team during a staff meeting, ready to outline new goals for the coming months. "Reform isn't a destination," she told them. "It's a process, one that requires constant effort and vigilance. We've made strides, but our work is far from finished." Her words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. They knew the challenges ahead wouldn't disappear overnight, but they also knew they had a leader willing to guide them through the toughest battles. By the end of the year, significant milestones had been achieved. Federal legislation mandating body cameras for all law enforcement officers passed with bipartisan support, marking a historic victory for accountability advocates. Independent oversight boards sprang up in cities nationwide, giving citizens a voice in holding police accountable. Training programs expanded rapidly, reaching thousands of officers eager to improve their skills and build trust with the communities they served. For Maya, these accomplishments represented not just personal triumphs, but collective victories. She often reminded herself that this wasn't about her. It was about creating a fairer, safer world for everyone. And though the journey was far from over, she felt proud of what had been accomplished so far. On a quiet evening, as Maya looked out over the city skyline from her office window, she reflected on the events that had brought her here. What started as a single act of injustice had grown into a nationwide movement for change. It hadn't been easy, and there were still battles to fight, but she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself, smiling softly. "And I won't stop until we've built a system that truly serves everyone." With renewed determination, Maya turned back to her desk, ready to face whatever came next. The fight for justice was far from over, but as long as she kept moving forward, she knew real change was possible.